Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Starr Allen, and I am joined today by the lovely Samantha Lee Wright. And we have an amazing episode in store for you guys. Samantha Lee Wright is not only a master of her platform, but a passionate teacher of the podcasting medium. So we're going to be talking all things podcasting today. She is leading the next generation of podcasters into the future with clarity and confidence. She mentors new podcasters on their journey with her no holds barred online course, Pineapple Podcast Academy, the online training program, which has helped dozens of new creators start and grow their podcast from scratch. She believes the world needs great people making great podcasts, and big things can happen from the smallest of microphones. With a bootstrapper's approach to business, she fosters creativity, strategy, and accountability in her students in order to help them achieve success in the podcasting arena. She's the author of Pineapple Podcasting, the ultimate beginner's guide to creating, launching, and monetizing a podcast with zero experience and a shoestring budget. And she's part hippie, so we have that in common. Part tech geek, we have that in common too. And has an unabashed love for all things karaoke. She's a teacher, speaker, writer, podcaster, wife, and mother of two living in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina. So we have North Carolina in common as well. So how are you doing today, Samantha?
I'm doing great, Amy. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's so great to have you on here, and I can't wait to dive into your expertise around podcasting, but also I really want to share you and your story with my audience because it's super, super inspiring. So I know that you have one of the most, I want to see,
world's number one essential oils podcast.
Yes, the number one essential oils podcast. And didn't you do this in like a matter of weeks, like going from nothing to like one of the top podcasts in a matter of weeks?
Yeah. Well, I suppose on the surface, that's what it looked like. I hit that launch button. And then a few weeks later, I was number one in that category. But of course, there was a months and months and months leading up to making that happen. But I've been podcasting for over 6 years now with that same show, The Essential Oil Revolution, going strong, just, using my niche and serving my audience there, and still am number one in that category, and hit 5 million downloads this year. And that was really exciting. And it's been just such an amazing journey from beginning to now.
Yeah. I love that you teach people like how to do this, like in a bootstrapping way, because I think, you can touch on this as much as you want to throughout this conversation, but I think a lot of people probably get stopped because they think that they have to have like a really expensive microphone or some kind of a studio or some type of editing software and all this different stuff as far as just being able to get started. And I love that.
So not true. I started out with a $40 microphone, borrowed money from a friend to pay for my, $5 a month hosting, and just set up shop in my basement. I was lucky. I already owned a computer, a laptop, and I had internet. Those, that was everything I needed. But I remember it was funny because I was trying to find pictures of my studio when I was just starting out for a project, and I was looking through my photos and I could not find any pictures of my studio. And I kind of remember back then I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, my podcast studio, my office is just this crappy, basement apartment with, stuff everywhere and dingy, and my desk was from Goodwill's all scratched up and everything. And so I was kind of embarrassed at the time and never really took any pictures because of that fact. But I really wish I had those pictures now so people could see, you don't have to get fancy when you're starting out in podcasting. You can sound professional even with a $40 microphone, if you know the right settings to set everything up on.
Yeah. Well, I even know people that podcast like on their phone in their car, like while they're driving, so you literally can do it I mean, it won't sound, obviously it's not going to sound as good as if you have an actual microphone, but it can be done. I think, one of the things that I like to just talk about briefly is for people that want to get their message out there. I am a content creator. I love to teach people about content creation. And I have a lot of people in my audience who are afraid to get on camera or just do not want to be seen on camera. So I feel like for people in that situation, maybe podcasting would be a good alternative for them to be able to, share their voice, share their message, and not have to worry about the camera aspect of
Yeah.
it. So can you share a little bit about
That was
that?
That was one of the biggest reasons I got into podcasting, because I hate being on camera. I mean, I've gotten used to it over the years, and I can do it now without breaking into utter panic attack. But it used to be not the case, and that was why I loved podcasting so much, because and also I love asking questions. It was those two things. I wanted to do an interview-based podcast because I love asking people questions, and I didn't have to go on camera. So that was really nice, especially as women. I mean, I think this isn't talked about enough in our industry, but as a female entrepreneur, especially, you get judged so quickly by your appearance, whether or not, today I didn't have a lot of time to put on like a lot of makeup before this interview. I just like threw on a little lipstick and a little eyeliner, brushed my hair out. But a lot of the female entrepreneurs that have a big camera presence, I mean, it takes a lot of time out of your day to really get prepared for the camera, let alone being comfortable in front of the camera. So podcasting is a way to achieve a very, very similar level of intimacy. And I'd argue even almost more intimacy, because people are getting to know you by your voice. You're directly talking to someone into their ear. And there's an intimacy to that you almost can't achieve on video, because when you see someone on video, you can sometimes get very distracted by their appearance, or, maybe they're looking down, not right at the camera, so they look a little shifty, or they're moving their hands too much and it's distracting, or the lighting's bad or whatever. So you make all these kind of prejudgments. But when you just hear someone's voice, there's a level of intimacy there that is, to me, one of the most valuable things that podcasting can give to a creator.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm obsessed with listening to podcasts. Like I have a dog that I walk 3 times a day, 2 miles at a time. And I listen to podcasts the whole time, every time. I listen to them when I'm driving. I listen to them when I'm cleaning my house, when I'm exercising. And I totally agree with what you're saying. Like I might be multitasking, but there's no distractions. Like when you're on YouTube and all these other videos are there, and you're tempted to like click in other places and do all this other stuff
Right.
when you're on a screen. Whereas when you're just listening, I might be driving my car, but I don't have any of those other distractions, and I'm fully like engaged. And I do feel like I have an intimate relationship with a lot of the podcasts that I subscribe to with those people. Like I really feel like they're like part of my day.
You feel like you're hanging out. You're like, yeah, we're hanging out today. They're walking my dogs with me. I mean, I get letters from my listeners all the time of like, oh, thanks for keeping me company on the way to work, or when I walk my dogs, or when I wash my dishes. And it's like such an honor to feel like I'm hanging out with all these people all around the world.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And not just hanging out, but I get so much of my inspiration from the podcasts I listen to. So, that's the other thing. It's such a gift to be able to offer that to our audience without even having to get on camera.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to mention, because I know we talked about, how your podcast is number 1 in your category, but I just wanted to mention that for my listeners, that Samantha actually went from, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far what I remember is that you went from living on food stamps to 6-figure, making 6 figures a year with just your podcast in a short period of time. Is that correct?
It wasn't so short to me feeling at the time. I think it was, I was podcasting for about a year before I started getting consistent sponsorship deals. And it took another really 2 years after that before I believe it was actually in the 4th year that we broke 6 figures. So it was it felt to me like slow, but it was a steady climb up, and I think people need to understand that it doesn't often happen overnight. It takes a lot of consistency and showing up every day,
Mm-hmm.
even when
Mm-hmm.
there's only, I started out with 50 listeners and, 50 downloads, and now I have 5 million downloads, but I had to treat
Mm-hmm.
those first 50 downloads the same as I treat my, listeners today as well. But yeah, we were a family of 4. We were struggling. I had my first kid was 2, and my baby was about a year old when I started my podcast. And my husband was working construction. He worked, we live in the mountains, so that's kind of a seasonal thing here. And, he was getting paid kind of the regular carpenter rate. So we were making about $17,000 a year living off of that as a family, and hitting up food banks and food stamps and just living with the just, shame feelings that come with all of that. But I used it to fuel me. Like, I'm not going to stay here. Like, I've got to do something
Yeah.
about this. And I dabbled in lots of different side hustles and things like that. And was so blessed to be able to come to podcasting as really my answer, because it was so perfect for me as a mom staying at home with her babies. I could work on it in the cracks, 5 minutes here or there, or, oh, they're sleeping, they're napping, let me jump on the computer and do some things. Or, most of the interviews that I would conduct in the beginning were at nighttime when they were sleeping or when my husband was home. And yeah, it was a juggle, it was a hustle, and it didn't happen overnight, but we were able to, break out. And now we live in our dream home now, and my husband gets to make art again. And it's been a total blessing, this whole journey.
I love it. So, okay. So a few questions came up just from everything that you just said. So the first one is, so your income, does it come primarily from sponsorship, or do you have like other streams of income that you're directing people toward? I know you have an academy, right? And you have a book.
Yeah, it's pretty diverse. And I've built on that over the years. When I first started my show, my biggest source of income and what I was centering the show around really was my essential oils business, which was, an MLM thing. And that was like my first tiptoe into entrepreneurship, was that MLM opportunity, which is a lot of people, I think, their introduction to becoming an entrepreneur is one of, some sort of at-home business opportunity. For better or worse, there's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of pro cons and a lot of strong feelings around MLM that we can get into or not. But that was kind of the start, right? My first income stream, my first hub. With the podcast, I realized that it was kind of quickly growing into something beyond that. And that, I know on your show, it's a lot about living in alignment. And that for me was really key, realizing that, the way that a lot of people build this kind of business, or are taught to build this kind of business, is it kind of in this one box. You have to do this, you have to teach classes, you have to cold call or call your friends and use this script and, all this stuff. And it was a lot of aspects of that I didn't like. I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to call all my friends, or I don't want to, follow this script that to me just doesn't sound like me. And so the podcast was my solution for really sharing my love of what those products were, the essential oils, my genuine love for what those were and what those could do for people through this avenue of podcasting. And that kind of grew into this larger community that opened up doorways to other income opportunities like sponsorships. That was, I'd say, my second income stream that really branched off, that started bringing in, and to this day is accounts for about, I'd say, 50% of my income. And then other opportunities, like I did a big online summit, because of my podcast. I was found by a company that specializes in health and wellness online summits. And I don't know if you've ever been to that kind of thing. So they approached me and said, hey, we want to do a summit about essential oils. Will you host it? Let's work together and let's partner. And that was a huge, huge opportunity for me that then opened the doorway into affiliate marketing because I walked away from that summit that I did with an email list of 100,000 people, like overnight. I was like, wow, what can I do with this now? Like I get to serve a lot of these people in different ways. And that turned into, well, maybe I'll create a digital product for them and create an online course about essential oils. So it was really kind of just stacking on top of success here and growing the community to slightly larger. And how can I serve the community again in different ways? So that's been the journey of really the first 5 years of that business. And that's all still happening, but pretty streamlined. And then it was not till, I guess the beginning of 2020 that I finally kind of caved into the outside pressures of people that wanted me to teach them podcasting, because people could see what I did with my podcast and would constantly come up to me or message me, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, can you give me any advice, or what do I do? How do I get started? What equipment do I buy? All the questions. And I found myself having all these conversations with people and just loving it, absolutely loving helping people with that aspect, even if it had nothing to do with my industry, health and wellness or oils or whatever. I would meet people, be like, oh, I think I want to do this really kind of weird podcast idea where it's just me and my friends like in a closet laughing. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, yes, please make that podcast. Like, let me help you. Like, let me help you get started. And it was a response to being asked to teach about podcasting that this year I've really branched into doing that, mentoring new podcasters. I created an online academy for that. And that's just it's been so much fun. I can't lie. Like, it's my favorite job. It's my favorite thing I've ever gotten to do, is be able to coach these new podcasters, because podcasting has changed my life so much. And I'm such a huge fan of podcasts themselves. Like you, I listen to them constantly. And I see so much potential in the world for more great podcasts coming from great people, that hopefully it can change their lives in a similar way that it did mine.
Yeah. I love, love, love this. I love hearing the organic evolution of what happens, because one of the things that I know and talk about all the time is how we never know what will happen when we put ourselves out into the world, whether in any kind of content. A lot of people get stopped by, fear and the fear of messing up or whatever. And I always say, like, if you make 99 or 100 pieces of content and 99 of them flop, even if one of them, takes off or whatever, you never know who's going to see that one. Maybe Oprah's going to see that one and change the trajectory of your life. Or like I've had different things happen for people in my community who like started making YouTube videos, who got kind of like you with the summit, like somebody would reach out to them and say, hey, are you interested in this other opportunity that has kind of nothing to do with what they're currently doing, but gets them, gives them another opportunity. And so I love how somebody found you and said, hey, do you want to come be a part of this summit? And that just came from you doing your thing and being consistent and putting your work out there. And then from that, you said overnight, you gained 100,000 subscribers. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that's not something that you could predict, right? That's just,
no, absolutely.
That just came
not. And it's not something that had I set my goal when I started my podcast. Oh, I want to start my podcast so that I can one day host an online summit that reaches 100,000 people and then turn into, affiliate marketing. And so, that's just not something that was on the vision board, let's say, in the beginning. And I think it's really important for people to understand and embrace the one baby step at a time, one step forward at a time, even if it's a small step forward, but you have to take the reins. You have to take control of your business. It's yours. It's great when you can get, let's say, discovered or picked up here or there, but that's never going to happen if you don't every day show up for yourself and put yourself out there, even if nobody's watching yet. There's so many magical things that happen when you're consistent in your platform. Like in the beginning, I was a terrible interviewer. I was a terrible host. My speaking skills were awful. I was still learning how to mic and edit and all these things. It took doing it for week after week after week after week to get good at it, or I'd like to think I'm good at it now. And that's what happens when you decide, I'm going to show up, I'm going to show up consistently, and I'm going to do it authentically in my way. It will reach people eventually, but you can't quit. You can't quit. I remember, I'll share this one quick story about being, I think it was about a year in to launching my podcast, and it was going well. We were reaching, I think at that point we had about 10,000 subscribers to the podcast itself each week. And I was just starting to get into sponsorship deals and whatnot, but it was slow. I mean, I was not making that much money from it yet. And I had to call my sister and ask her to borrow money. I'd never done that before. And was like, can I borrow $200? I have to pay my internet bill. I was behind on my internet bill and my electric bill, because I can't keep working without electricity or internet. And, she lent me the money, and I quickly, called the electric company to pay the bill. And I hang up the phone, and literally 30 seconds later, there's a knock on the door, and the electric company was there. The two guys were at the door. They said, "Hey, we got to turn off your electricity. You haven't paid your bill." And I was like, no, I just got off the phone. Like I have an interview in an hour. Like, you can't turn off my electricity. And then, they got the call that I just paid. And so they left, but it was just that was such a hard moment. It was such a hard day for me, where I'm like, okay, I think at that point was paying to have my kids in childcare two half days a week. So it was like these 2 half days a week that I could do interviews and do the editing, do the things I needed in my business. And, I couldn't even pay the bills, let alone pay myself. And I'm paying to have my kids in childcare. And it was just this day where I was like, why am I doing this? Like I'm not making money yet, but I kept seeing the potential. I kept seeing the growth. And so I kept with it, and then I'm glad I did, because, it eventually paid off and paid my sister back and never had to borrow money from her again. So
that's awesome. I love how you were talking about like taking the baby steps, because, I'm a big believer in, like, we don't need to know the how we're going to get to where we want to go. We just need to know, like, the, what and why we're doing what we're doing. But like, you said you couldn't have predicted the whole summit thing and that kind of taking, helping your business take off like it did and stuff like that. And I feel like being consistent, when we're consistent, stuff like that happens without us. Like, we don't have to put the how on our vision board, or, however we're setting our goals, right? Because it's not predictable, and it's often magical when we show up and do the work. And I also love how you talked about how, like, in the beginning, you were not good at it and you got better with time, because that's another thing that I'm adamant about, is like, this is something that takes practice. We're constantly honing in on our skills and honing in on our craft and getting better at what we do. But the only way that we can do it is by doing it consistently and failing and putting out content that nobody's paying attention to because it sucks. And like, you know what I mean? Just doing it anyway and doing it consistently. So I love, I love that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people have this false idea that, like, when they listen to a podcaster that's just so polished and so valuable and so great at interviewing or whatever, they think that person, like, was born with some kind of a gift that they don't have. And it's just not true. It's just because they've been doing it for a while and getting better and better and better at it. So, what would be your suggestion as far as when you talk about being consistent? Like, what does a schedule look like? What's an ideal schedule for somebody if they were just going to think about starting a podcast? What would you say would go into it as far as schedule, time? Like, how often should they be publishing a podcast, and what are they doing on the days that they're not actually publishing a podcast?
Yeah. Well, it's almost an impossible question to answer, because podcasts are so unique. Every podcast is its own thing with its own schedule. And that's one of the great things about it, is it can be anything, I like to give the examples of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast, one of the oldest, most successful podcasts in the world, produces about 2 episodes a year. And each episode is 3 to 6 hours long. So you've got that, that end of the spectrum. And then you've got a daily podcast that maybe has 5 or 6 minute long episodes each day, like a horoscope podcast that shows up and reads the horoscope for the day. And so there's so much variation that that's something I help my students think through in the academy, is thinking about, who are you serving? Who is your audience? What kind of content are you serving? And what makes sense around that content, mixed in with what would your audience prefer from you? Would they prefer 5 minutes every day? Would they prefer 20 minutes once a week, an hour once a week, 30 minutes every 2 weeks, mixed in with what are you capable of doing? And that's going to depend on the complexity, the quality of your content. Some content is more complex and takes a lot of time. Maybe your content requires you to travel and interview people, or you want to give a really high production value with lots of sound editing and background music and, all the beautiful things. So, you can't really expect yourself to whip something out once a week. And it depends on your team and the size of your team. And if you're going to outsource your editing, there's just so many factors. So it's a hard question to answer in that regard. I will share with my podcast, because I do have more of your standard run of the mill. It's a once a week show where I interview someone on my show each week. The format's pretty consistent. The production value is high, but not complicated. So I'm able to get an episode out each week. And over the years, I've been able to outsource a lot of that as well. I outsource my editing is done by someone else. I outsource the person who sets up the interviews now is my assistant, and that takes a lot of time off my plate. So now I only work on my actual podcast about 4 hours a week. And then all my other time is really spent on the academy, making new sales funnels for that new project. Or like right now I'm working on a quiz funnel. It's been really fun to build for my podcast. So I get to free up a lot of time that way. But in the beginning, I was wearing all the hats. I was doing the graphics, I was doing the setting up interviews, the building the websites, the everything. And I was working probably, I was a stay-at-home mom at the time too. So I only had so many hours in the day, but I probably got in about 30 hours a week at least. I remember staying up very late, 2:00 in the morning, which I could do at the time. I actually was up till 2:30 in the morning just the other night, like 2 nights ago, helping my husband with a shower remodel. And now I'm older now, and it bit me in the butt so much. I got a huge migraine that night and couldn't do it anymore. I can't hack it. I can't hack the late nights anymore. But in the beginning, that's all I had was late nights when my kids are sleeping, and I hustled. I hustled really hard and wore all the hats. And that's sometimes what you have to do. But I think if you're hustling hard, don't hold on to that hustle forever. Make it your goal to start outsourcing where you can, so that you can stay in your zone of genius as much as possible. And for me and my podcast, that's, providing the content and hitting that record button and interviewing people, as opposed to doing all the other things.
So for someone starting out, you don't have to have a team already set up when you're starting out, right? Like you're like you did, you can work into it gradually. You just have to be prepared for all of the, the time that goes into it. I think that's a misconception as well. I've seen a lot of people start a podcast and then quit because they don't realize that how much actually does go into it. Right. But anyway, can you say how long did it take you to start outsourcing? Like how long were you doing everything by yourself, and how realistic is it for somebody who doesn't have a team to actually, I got to turn these notifications off. How realistic is it for somebody who doesn't have a team to, to get started if they don't have all the time in the world and they have other stuff going on, maybe they have a job or kids or, whatever.
I think if you're in the situation where you have other income coming in, whether that's from your own job or a spouse's income, I would, if you're in that situation, I would try to outsource at least the sound editing, the final sound editing, right from the beginning, because it takes a lot of time and expertise. If you've never done it before, you can learn it. And I teach people how to do that on in the academy, but it takes a lot of time. And that's the one thing that I think holds a lot of people back, as they want to record it. I'm a big fan of more polished podcasts, as opposed to the kind where you just kind of hit record and fumble through and just, send it into production. I like a little bit of at least like putting in a little intro and a little music here or there, whatnot. And if it's a low complexity podcast, it really doesn't take that much, but there's a lot that goes into sound quality and production and sound editing, that if you can outsource that from the beginning, you can find a decent editor, between, $20 and $60 an hour. So it depends on the complexity and what your budget is. So if you're doing, let's say, one episode a week, that's 30 to 60 minutes long, we're talking maybe $100 to $200 a month, paying someone to do that. And so if you've got other income coming in, highly recommend you use that to cover at least that part. And that's going to save you a lot of headache in the beginning. But if you have to do it all yourself, give yourself an extra, 6 to 8 hours per every hour long of content that you're editing yourself in the beginning.
Yeah. I love that you're saying this, because again, I like to be realistic about what it actually takes. It takes more than just talking into a microphone. There's other things that go into it. So what are your recommendations? Is there something that you do when you're working with people in your academy, as far as helping people to determine whether or not their audience would be better off with an interview style podcast versus just solo talk to the microphone type of podcast?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot that goes into answering those kinds of questions. We walk through an avatar exercise, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Have you talked much about, figuring out who your avatar is, who is that ideal customer or listener that you want tuning into your podcast? We go through that in a lot of detail. But at the end of the day, it really just is all about asking that question, who do I want to reach with my content? What do I want them to get out of it? And then all of those kind of answers fall into place, because you can ask yourself, well, what is the best way to convey this kind of content? What does my avatar want? And how do they best learn? What do they want from me? Is it interviews? Do they want to just hear from me? And it varies so much across the spectrum of podcasts that there's so many options in there. That's the quiz that I'm creating right now helps people walk through a lot of those options that they might not even know exist. For example, there's one show called Love and Radio, which I love if you're into kind of storytelling, investigative journalism type exploration things, where they interview different subjects on different subject matters, and they end up stripping out most of the interview, the host voice, so that you don't even really get to hear the questions that are asked. They just weave together their subject matter's answers into this really beautiful storytelling platform with beautiful music and background sounds and things like that. That's amazing. And so some people don't even realize, like, oh, I can do that. Like that's the type of podcast I can create. And I'm like, yes, you can. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's really about what kind of content you're trying to create. And in the same question, you could reframe it as, what kind of art are you trying to make? I really do see podcasting as an art form. Whether your podcast is more dry and just straightforward, like my show, where it's just like an interview-based show where we're just teaching people about how to use essential oils, right? It's very straightforward, but I still view it as art and how can I best convey this content to people? I will say there is a lot of advantage to doing an interview-based show as far as growth and marketing, because when you do an interview-based show, you hope and you encourage that whoever you're interviewing on your show is then going to share that with their audience, right? So that's one way that you can get more exposure, because that person can hopefully turn around and say, hey, everyone, look, I just did this interview on this podcast you might enjoy. And that's one way to get exposure. So if you're doing a solo podcast where it's just you have to be a lot you have to hustle a little harder on your marketing to get yourself in front of more people. One strategy that works well is to go interview on other people's podcasts and give really great content, actionable content when you're on someone else's platform to get exposure to your own show as well.
Yeah. So what do you recommend as far as, I'm sorry, I am trying to turn off these notifications and they won't turn on. Like I have them all turned off on my system preferences, but they keep
I
coming.
can't hear
and I
them
don't
on
know
my
why.
end.
Okay, good. Hopefully they won't show up on the recording, but so as far as equipment, like for someone just starting out, like what are the essentials to get started if you want to start a podcast and you're on a shoestring budget and you're going to bootstrap your way up? What do you need right out of the gate as far as equipment, hosting, that kind of stuff? Like,
sure. So you need a microphone. Obviously, I highly recommend people don't record right into their computers or right into their phones. And if you can afford just a step above your earbuds that would plug right into your phone or your computer, I would highly recommend that, because it's, podcasts are all about sound. You want to have a good quality sound. That's how people, they've done studies actually on even videos. Your video quality doesn't matter nearly as much as your sound quality as far as engagement and people's ability to connect with you. So a microphone is great. I recommend USB microphones. So the kind that have a USB port that you can plug directly into your computer. And then one thing that's not talked a lot about when buying microphones is there's two types of microphones in the world. There's dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. And if you are recording at home in a room that's not specifically sound treated, it's not a sound booth, it doesn't have a lot of infrastructure in place that for soundproofing and reducing echo around your room, then you want to get yourself a dynamic microphone. And those, so if you're shopping, just make sure it says dynamic microphone, not condenser microphone, because those types of mics tend to pick up less echo, tend to pick up less background noise and things like that. If you are lucky enough to record in a sound studio, or if you have like a closet in your house that you can dedicate and turn it into a little sound studio, then you might want to consider a condenser microphone, because they give just a little bit of a richer sound, which is great, but you definitely want to make sure you're in a sound treated room for that. So the budget is across the board. I have a free workshop that people can take that has a download of different microphones in different budgets. And I've got dynamic and condensers on there as well. And I believe the lowest price point one is around $35. When I started out, it was a $40 microphone. It was the ATR 2100. Great little mic. It gained a lot of popularity over the years though. So they've changed the price. Now it's like a $70 microphone. It's the same mic, but they caught on that people were recommending that one a lot. So it's upped a little bit. It's a great little microphone. The ATR 2100 is a great start for a lot of people. And then other than that, you need hosting. So podcast hosting, which is just like consider the home of your podcast. It's where all your podcast files live. It's how your podcast gets distributed to places like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those things. A lot of people think when they start out in podcasting, when they create new content, they have to go give that content over to Spotify and Apple and iHeartRadio and all the places. But no, you just have to upload it into your media host. And that's where it will then get distributed to those different places. And of course, we walk through, how to set all that up and how that works in the academy. But there's a lot of different hosting platforms out there that you can choose from. And a lot of them have different pros and cons. If you are podcasting and your goal is to use podcasting as part of your business, if it's anything above a hobby or a one-time little project, you definitely want to go with not one of the free podcasting places out there, because you'll be so limited on your statistics, your ability. Some free sites even technically own your content, and you definitely don't want that. So my recommendation for people getting started is a place called Libsyn. LIBSYN. They've been
That's what I use
in the
too.
game since the beginning. Yeah, and they're great. So I am an affiliate. If you use coupon code SAM, SAM, you get your first month free with them if you want to give it a try. But they're so affordable. Like I've always been really impressed at the different types of plans they offer people. You can start out for $5 a month, as opposed to a lot of the other places make you start at about like 15 or $20 a month. And, it's a big difference. So if you're starting out small, or it kind of depends on how much content you're producing, then you can start out with one of their low cost plans, and you're good to go. So you've got your mic, you got your podcast hosting. Most computers come with some sort of editing software like GarageBand, or if you're on a PC, you can get Audacity so that you can record and, cut your clips up and move them around. And we teach all that as well in the academy. And that's it. That's all you need. Well, and internet helps with lots of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, and then what do you suggest as far as coming up with a name of a podcast? Should people use their own name, or should they come up with a catchy name, or should the name be very obvious about what their podcast is? Or what are your tips around that?
Yeah. Oh, this is one of my favorite topics to talk on. I don't know how much time we have, because I can get real geeked out on naming your podcast.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we go into this pretty deep because it is such a crucial decision to make. And so, in the academy, we take a lot of time walking people through really getting to solidify your podcast concept. Really, what is your show going to be about? Not just what, but how is it going to sound? Why are people tuning in? Who is going to listen? A lot of these questions are really vital to have crystal clear, because when you get to the step of naming your podcast, all of those little decisions that you make up to that point really get wrapped up into a pretty little bow when you're naming your show. But my biggest recommendation for people is to go for clear over clever. So we all want a clever sounding podcast name, but when we get too clever, we really miss out on an opportunity for the people we're trying to reach to connect with us, because we want to make it clear, especially for shows that are more in niche categories or instructional or educational categories, which a lot of podcasts are. Then you want to make it really crystal clear from the first time someone comes across your show of what you have to offer them. So if you're trying to create a show, let's say about I don't know, the world of dogs, right? And the amazing world of dogs, and being a pet owner or whatnot, then you'd really be shooting yourself in the foot if your podcast name didn't really have the word dogs in it in any way. I teach people what I call embrace the dash as well. So embrace the dash in your title. So you can have an official podcast title name that, let's say for our dog podcast, we want to call it The Pup. All right, my show's called The Pup, right? That sounds really cool. It's also very clear, like, oh, this obviously has something to do with dogs, but it's got a nice ring to it. It's easy for people to remember. It's kind of cool, but it doesn't really help us out so much when it comes to search engine optimization inside podcast apps themselves, and that is crucial. I mean, that's the money. That's like the money right there, is having good keywords built into your title so that when people are inside their podcast apps searching for a certain thing, they can find your content, because the keywords, the words that are in your show title, are the number one factor in how you show up in search result rankings inside podcast apps. So if, let's say, we're doing our show about dogs, we want to name our show The Pup. It's okay to say The Pup dash, a show about dogs or something, and give it that little subtitle, let's call it, that has those keyword rich words in there. So for people starting out from scratch, like I started out from zero, I needed to take every advantage I could to help people find my content. I had all sorts of names picked out for my podcast. I was thinking maybe it would be like Lavender Fields Forever, like, the Beatles song, or it'd be like Unicorn Tears, because that's a nickname for essential oils. All sorts of names, or like Sam Loves Lavender, whatever. In the end, I named it the Essential Oil Revolution because I needed the word essential oil in there so that people searching for those keywords could find it. I believe my first official title was the Essential Oil Revolution dash an aromatherapy natural living show, so that I could also get those keywords of aromatherapy, natural living in there as well. And that is, I'd say hands down one of the most important decisions I made from the beginning, and why my show is able to be discovered by so many people around that. I mean, I get messages every day from people that say, hey, I found your podcast because I was searching for essential oils in my podcast app, and I found your show and I love it. And that would not have happened, and still wouldn't happen, if I'd named it something just really clever. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you're talking about this, because I say this all the time too, when I'm working with my clients and stuff, and they want to be real cute and clever with their names of things, and even like headlines for things, and titles of even specific pieces of content, videos or whatever, because it is important that people can find it when they're searching, right? Like SEO is how you get found. So if people, and people will search, like you said, you get messages every day from people that are like, maybe they're on their morning walk and they want to listen to something about essential oils. They want to learn more about essential oils, and they search for that. And if it was called Unicorn Tears, they wouldn't find you. And even if they did, they wouldn't know that it was about essential oils. So
right.
I think that's such good advice.
Exactly.
If somebody has already started a podcast and realizes that like the name isn't quite right, or wants to change the name down the road, can they change the name down the road?
Yeah, you can. It's relatively easy to change your name from a technical standpoint. But if you've been podcasting for, a year or two under one name, and you've already built yourself up a pretty, decent following, you just have to make that calculation in your mind. How many followers do I have now? How confused are they going to be if I change the name? And is that worth it? But if you've been stuck in podcasting, you've only got a handful of listeners for each episode, and you feel like your title is kind of holding you back, then I say go for it. Go for the change. Yeah, I was working with a student of mine. They're a co-hosted podcast together, and they'd done a season of their podcast already, and were really struggling. They weren't getting found. And I forget, their original title was, I want to say something mompreneur, I can't even say it right. That's one of the problems. Like mompreneur, the mompreneur podcast for work-life balance, or something like that. Like, it was very descriptive. But when I was working with them, I kind of kept digging deeper and asking lots of questions to them, because we do weekly group coaching calls every week. So I get to talk to my students, which is really key. And talking, about who's your show for? What's your show all about? And through a lot of questioning and self-discovery, they're like, well, really, we're really more trying to target moms who are living abroad and trying to balance, living in a new country and like building their businesses at the same time, or just balancing that work life at the same time. And so we went through kind of a whole rebrand of their show to figure out what were those keywords, what were the most important keywords to put into their title. And let's get a title that people can remember, pronounce, search for. And they rebranded this season, and it's been serving them a lot better so far. I'm trying to remember what the new title was. I have a terrible memory for that kind of thing. I think it was like the new title was something about Mom Bosses Abroad, I think is the new name, or something. It was much more clear and had a lot more rich SEO words in it now.
Yeah, I love that. So what about the people that like name their podcast like the Amy Starr Allen Show? Like, how does that work if people aren't searching for you specifically, but your podcast is in a certain niche? Can they still find you?
I think it's really hard to start a podcast out under your personal name if you don't already have a following. So if you're, an Instagram influencer, or you've already gotten your start somewhere else and you want to create a show that gives you license, let's say, to talk about pretty much anything you want to talk about. That's the great thing about personal branded name shows, the Oprah Winfrey show or the Shalene Johnson
Mhm.
show or whatever, they're allowed to talk about whatever they want because it's Oprah, right? Everyone knows her
Mhm.
and they know her name. If you are starting from scratch, and by that I mean you don't have a successful brand yet, you don't have a business yet, you don't have a following yet, you don't have people who know you already, then it's really, really difficult to start a personal brand from scratch. In podcasting, if you don't have a big budget for marketing, right? If you got a big budget for marketing, you got a big team, then like go for it. But really where I specialize in is people not like that. People like me who are starting out with a shoestring budget, with no following, no experience. Then my advice is to, when you're starting in podcasting, the harder you can niche down, the more specific about who you're trying to serve and what kind of show you're creating. Don't create your Oprah Winfrey show. Don't create I'm going to start a podcast, talk about whatever I want to, and hope that people find it and hope people connect with it. I mean, that is a surefire recipe for, trying to please everyone. So you end up pleasing no one and you go nowhere. So
Mhm.
not that you can't start a show under your name, but if you're starting from scratch, you're really going to find an uphill battle, as opposed to if you were to figure out what is your niche, who are you serving? And then if you're really stuck on, well, I really want to create the Samantha Lee Wright show, then embrace the dash. Samantha Lee Wright dash, a podcast for stay-at-home moms, or wherever that
Mhm.
disclaimer, that tagline is going to help define you.
Such a beautiful piece of advice right there. I hope everybody heard that. Because when people ask me all the time, like what their domain name should be for their website, and mine is my name, and I've had my website for 15, 16 years, and it's evolved over time with whatever I want it to be, whatever my business is about. And I've kind of, I've grown and evolved so my website can grow and evolve with me. I always recommend staying away from like naming your website the name of your network marketing company,
Right.
some
Yeah.
spin on that, because then the minute that company goes out of business or you switch to another one, like your website is dead in the water. Where and it's
Exactly.
good for branding purposes, for people to just be able to find you by your name. But I love how you
Yeah.
just talked about that. Why, when nobody knows you and you're creating content on a searchable platform,
Right.
like a podcast platform, the best way that you're going to be
And
able to
just an
grow.
extra SEO tip on podcast platforms themselves, you will submit the author name, and your author name can be your name. And that's going to show up right under your podcast title. It'll say your podcast show, and then right underneath whatever you put in for your author name. And that is searchable on SEO through the podcast app as well. So, if you've got a name, like people can still find you by your name, but then you can also get a title that serves you. But I'm also a huge fan of websites that are your name. I have my SamanthaLeeWright.com website. It's my favorite website because, like you, I've been, entrepreneur for a while. It evolves all the time. Right now it's very focused on podcasting, as opposed to 2 years ago is mostly about, natural health and things like that. And you are able to transform things. But I have my podcast website itself is revolutionoilspodcast.com. And that, I have like a tab on my personal website, that links out to that. So, but I'm a big fan of having a personal brand that's under your name. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we will link to all of these things that she's saying, including her free, you said you had a free guide. I forget what you said your free guide was.
Yeah, it's a free workshop that it comes with a guide as well. That's like downloadable.
Yeah. So just in case anybody's like trying to write ferociously, or you're driving a car, you're at the beach or something listening to this, then don't worry about it. All of these links will be in the show notes. So just, getting towards the end of this interview, I just want to one more thing that I want you to just touch on. I know you've kind of touched on it already, but just for anybody that's wondering, like, should I start a podcast? Is this a way that I could, get my business in front of my target audience? And, is this a good avenue for me to be authentic, be myself, share my content and my stand on things and my opinions about things or my expertise about things? Just anything else that you want to add to why this is, why you're so passionate about this, this
platform.
This, podcasting. Yeah.
Well, 1,000%. I might be a little biased, but I think I have good reason to be that podcasting is such a great solution for entrepreneurs, people who own businesses, people who aren't those things yet, but they think they want to be. Any of those categories of people, you can find easier success in podcasting compared to virtually every other digital platform. Comparing podcasting to YouTube or Facebook or starting a blog, there are still, podcasting has seen a ton of growth lately. There's no doubt about that. But there's still to this day only, I think we're approaching 2 million podcasts on Apple, but out of those 2 million, only about 900,000 actually produce consistent content still. Versus I think on YouTube over 1 million hours of content gets uploaded each day. I have those numbers in my book. I don't have them in front of me, but exponentially less competitive still in the podcasting arena, combined with the fact that to get started in podcasting is relatively very low cost. You don't have to buy a video camera. You don't even really need a website in the beginning either. You can start a podcast. If you've got $100 you can put towards podcasting right now. You can afford a microphone. You can afford your first, 6 months of podcast hosting. And it's not going to take you much more than that. And I have people that are taking my academy who are like, Sam, I really didn't think I was going to be able to do this. Older people. I've got a 14-year-old that takes my academy too. The whole gamut, people who are really bad with technology. I teach you every step. I hold your hand every step of the way, and it's everyone can figure it out. You can figure it out. And I think you'll find the freedom of creating a podcast and using that as a way to reach the type of people you're trying to reach. If you're smart about it, if you're really doing it intentionally from the ground up, you can find success in podcasting easier than just about everywhere else on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love, how you compared it to the competitiveness of, let's say YouTube, because it is something that it's not as competitive yet, but it's becoming more and more popular. More and more people are getting addicted to podcasts like you and I are, and wanting your podcast to be your companion when you're doing other things, when you're exercising and cleaning and things like that. It's becoming a platform that it's just so much easier to, I even listen when I'm brushing my teeth at night. You know what I mean? It's just so easy to just put your headphones in and do some personal development or learn something about whatever topic you're wanting to learn about or whatever, while you're multitasking, but still able to completely digest what you're listening to.
Or get free. I love audiobooks as well. And I love listening to fiction audiobooks as well. And I think people don't realize there's a ton of fiction podcasts out there too, that are so entertaining and they're free. They're completely free. You don't even have to pay for an audiobook if you're willing to listen to an ad here or there. And that's another thing that I love to share to people who are interested in podcasting. Don't put yourself in a box of what you think your podcast has to sound like. There's so many possibilities out there. If you have like just a stupid idea, go for it. Turn it into a podcast. It can be so much
and then
fun.
as it becomes more and more popular, podcasting, continues to grow. It'll probably be just as competitive as YouTube someday, but you'll already have created a foundation for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah. And I do agree. Like, I think what I love about it is, because I am a video marketer, but for people that I have so many people that say, Amy, I love what you do, but I could never do it because I don't want to be in front of the camera. I mean, I know people that go to a salon and get a blowout every week just to create their videos. And then like the day that they get their blowout, they batch their videos. Like they do all of their videos that day while their hair looks good. And, that's one way to do it if you don't want to worry about how you look every day or whatever. But not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to, put a lot of effort into the way that they look, or worry about that, or have that limit them in any way as far as how people might
just be comfortable. I just get very uncomfortable in front of the camera. I don't speak as well. I'm not myself as well. Like I always, that's why when I interview people on my podcast, I tend to just turn the camera off because I focus better, I speak better. And so if you're like me in that regard, then you might enjoy that aspect as well.
Yeah. I love that. So I think, again, I'm so passionate about, as you are, helping people to get their message out to the world and to make a difference. I feel like, we all came here with a purpose and gifts to share that make a difference for others. And so podcasting is definitely one way that you can do that, where people can still really get to know you, like you, and trust you on a deep level without you having to be in front of the camera. So I'm so glad that you've covered some of the ins and outs of it today. And before we end, I just want to know, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about, or any last thoughts that you want to share with the people?
Yeah, well, I think something that you just said brings up that a lot of people stop themselves from starting as well because they feel like imposters. What do I have to say? Who's going to want to listen to me? Or there's already a podcast out there about XYZ, and you are the only you on the planet, and there are so many people out there that could benefit from hearing from you. Even if it doesn't feel like it, there are people just like you, or who just need to hear your story, your message, your bizarre idea, whether it just puts a smile on their face for a day, or it makes them laugh, or it teaches them something, or inspires them. You are a walking piece of art, walking around on this planet every single day. And that deserves to be shared. So yeah, don't be afraid. Do it.
I love that. You are a walking piece of art that deserves to be shared. I'm gonna cry. All right. Well, like I said, we will link to all of Samantha's resources and websites and things that she mentioned today in the show notes of this podcast. And thank you so much, Samantha, for being here with us today. And congratulations on all of your success. And it's been awesome to get your take on starting a podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for doing all that you do. You've been doing this for a long time, and it's not easy to keep on going. And you're such a gift to those that you serve. So thank you, and thank you for letting me share with your people today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you guys on the next episode, and bye for now.